Welcome back, Kings fans. I'm Jesse Cohen. I am here at Toyota Sports Performance Center. The LA Kings practice this morning. Not only did the LA Kings practice this morning, but Ken Holland had a quarter season media availability. He met with the media for between 20 and 30 minutes. I wasn't checking my clock very carefully, so I'm just going to talk about some of the things that Ken Holland discussed, some of the things that Jim Hiller discussed. We spoke to Adrian Kempe, Trevor Moore, and Brant Clark in media scrums after the practice. All of those will be available on the LA Kings YouTube channel. Eventually, they were recorded, and I'm sure everybody that was there will have Twitter updates. Zach Dooley, John Hovan, Dennis Bernstein, Jim Fox, etc. So first up, let's go sort of middle out. Jim Hiller spoke to the media after the practice. Media was not able to watch the practice because we were speaking to Ken Holland while that was going on. By the way, if you're watching this on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, you can put any questions in the comments section and I will try and answer them as I see them. So Jim Hiller talked about the fact that Drew Doughty obviously out of the lineup. Brian Dumoulin would continue to be paired with Mikey Anderson. That's a pair that they feel confident with. Brian Dumoulin apparently has experience playing on the right side. That was not something I was aware of. I asked whether or not they were comfortable with a left shot defenseman filling in for Drew Doughty, or whether or not they would seek to find another right shot defenseman. Jonah wants to know how the power play has changed. So the power play has changed. Andrei Kuzmenko will be back in the lineup against the San Jose Sharks, and Andrei Kuzmenko will be playing on a line with Andrei Kopitar and Trevor Moore. Trevor Moore will be on his second power play unit, from what I was able to piece together. The top line, it looks like, will be Byfield, Fiala, and Kempe. That's not the power play. That's even strength. Apologies. But Kuzmenko, Kopitar, Perry, Byfield, and Kopitar. Is that the five forwards I think I mentioned on the top power play? And the second power play we were not able to watch because we were talking to Ken Holland, but it sounds like Trevor Moore will be on that second power play unit. So the lines will change. Jim Hiller shared that information with us. Brian Dumoulin will play with Mikey Anderson on the top defensive pair, and Andrei Kuzmenko back in the lineup, meaning Jeff Malott would likely be the forward who would come out of the lineup to accommodate Andrei Kuzmenko. So that's the lineup changes per Jim Hiller. Now, there was a lot of conversation about, obviously, on Adrian Kempe's contract extension and Brant Clark's RFA pending status. We heard from Ken Holland that he had preliminary conversations with Brant Clark's agent about a contract extension. Brant Clark is a restricted free agent at the end of the year. Asked Brant Clark about that. He confirmed. He said very preliminary. His agent is based out of Ontario. Brant Clark is from Ottawa. So it sounds like when Ken Holland was with the team on the Canadian road trip, he was speaking to multiple players' agents. I don't know if those agents attend games. I know I've seen agents at LA Kings games who are based out of LA, so likely that they do attend games in the Ontario region. But Ken Holland talked about that. There was a ton of conversation about penalty killing, Brant Clark's defensive evolution, whether or not he would ever see time on the penalty kill. And that was sort of danced around. I finally just asked, he's in the final year of his entry level contract. It's his D+5 season. There was a lot of talk about how young he is, about how fast his um, development curve has been for a player as young as he is. And I just said, like, at what point, he's not young forever. So at what point is he no longer young? And at what point is he who he is? And the answer was, we don't know. Players develop at different paces. And I asked Brant Clark, given all that conversation, is penalty killing something that you want to do? Um, Obviously, we know he's on the power play unit. We know that when the team is down late in a game, they lean on Brant Clark for more minutes to get them back in the game. Obviously, his offense is a valued part of his game, and defense is the part that they are waiting for, I suppose, to start trusting him with more defensive minutes, penalty kill, top pair D. I guess I'm not entirely sure, but Brant Clark said he was open to it. He answered it very well. He didn't demand it. He didn't say he wanted it, but he said he was open to it. He was prepared for it. He attends the penalty kill meetings. He pays attention if they ever need to call on him. He said he'll be ready to go. I asked Jim Hiller what a player can do in practices or in meetings to earn that trust. Because obviously, if you don't play them in the games, there's no way to there's no way to get experience without getting experience. So, what does a player have to do in meetings and practices? And there wasn't really a direct answer to that question. So, um, I'm still not entirely sure what the situation with Frank Clark is. I mean, I suppose at some level there is no situation. He's in the lineup, he's playing, but the to me the rhetoric and the actions still don't match, and that's confusing, and I don't quite understand it. I do want to briefly touch on um, the nature of these media availabilities because with Ken Holland, for example, it's the first real time that the media has had to speak to him and ask broader questions, larger questions. And while I thought some of the questions were very good today, some of the questions were sort of perfunctory. They had to be asked, but they don't yield any good results. There were a couple of questions about Adrian Kempe's contract. How great is it to have him, and how important is it to have somebody like that on the roster? And the answer is obviously it's very important. It's fantastic. But, in a 25-minute media availability, if those answers take up 5 minutes of the time, which I think they did, that's like 10 to 20% of your time with this guy, not getting many terrific answers. But a lot of the answers Ken Holland gave will be a good base for future availabilities. And a lot of these conversations, when you're having a conversation with a coach or an executive in these public settings, you're not going to get everything done at once because it's not a one-on-one conversation. It's not a give and take. You can't ask a question who gives you an answer you don't like and then you go back at it. I asked a question about centers and Ken Hall gave me an answer but said that he disagreed with what he thought I was getting at. Wasn't at all what I was getting at, but I'm not afforded the opportunity to correct the record or to go back at him. But now it's on the record, it's out there. So the next time one of these happens, probably 20 more games, we can revisit those conversations and get into them. So the question I asked was, the question had been brought up about Brand Clark's contract, and he said it's a summertime issue. He's restricted free agent. There's no pressure to get it done today. Totally fine, makes sense. But Anze Kopitar has announced he is retired. So finding a replacement at 1C or 2C, depending on how you look at it, because Quentin Byfield will play one of those roles next year. That's not a wait till the summer question. That's a you have to start thinking about that today question. We know it's coming. It's not theoretical. Or you can look at Adrian Kempe and say, well, he might sign, he might not. We don't have to think about the future because what if he signs? Then blah blah blah. But we know Anze Kopitar won't be here next year. So the question I had for Ken Holland was, if an opportunity presented itself to take one step back this year to potentially move the team forward 2 steps next year, would you do it? And the way I phrased it that way was I don't want to throw out a specific name. I don't want to make up a trade. But let's just say theoretically, if the team could acquire somebody like, and I'm going to totally make up a name here. All right. Let's just say if Nathan McKinnon, for whatever reason, was available in a trade, or I don't know. I don't want to say Connor McDavid, but anybody other than Connor McDavid, Jack Eichel, Nathan McKinnon, whoever it was, if for some reason one of those players was available to be acquired, would the Kings risk the stability they have on the roster now to acquire that player, knowing that Anze Kopitar will be gone next year? Meaning, would you take assets away from the roster to add a player that you thought made you better in the long term? Because that's the kind of question that you have to ask, knowing that Anze Kopitar is going to be gone. That's part of being a hockey manager. And the conversation to that point had leaned towards winning's the most important thing. We need to focus on this season. I asked, okay, now that Kempe has a contract extension, what's the next priority item on the list? And I was trying to lead into conversations about, does Andrei Kuzmenko agent get involved? Does Brant Clark's agent get involved? Drew Doughty's out. Do we have to look for replacements for him? Like, what's the next A1 item now that Kempe has an extension? And the answer was evaluate. So, okay, fine. That's perfectly fine. We need to evaluate where the team is right now. But part of that evaluation is knowing that your number one center, your Hall of Fame center, your two-time Stanley Cup winning, multiple award winning center is going to retire. So that's why I asked, would you be willing to take a step back this year to try and secure the future? And his answer was yes, but if the kind of player I think you're talking about isn't available, then it's a made up scenario. And what he thought I meant was finding another 23-year-old all situations, Hall of Fame center. That's not what I was talking about. I don't think those players are out there either. So, he's right. The theoretical scenario that he thought I was presenting doesn't exist. But that's why I phrased it the way I did. I don't think that scenario exists either. But if you could get a 28, 29, 30-year-old center, um, but it's going to cost you four or five roster players or two or three roster players. If you could get, like I said, I threw out these names, I'm totally making them up. But, if you could get a 28-year-old, 29-year-old superstar player who's available for trade for whatever reason, right? Like Vegas acquired Jack Eichel, totally freak scenario with his injuries and the situation in Buffalo, but stuff like that always happens. So that was what I was asking. Never mind a 22, 23-year-old, unicorn type player. What if you can just get a good enough player to replace Andre Kopitar? What if Ryan O'Reilly's out there, but it's going to cost you two or three roster players? Is that worth it to you? That was what I was getting. So we got the answer. Now the framework is laid, the groundwork is laid. Now we can reference it again 20 games from now. The next chance we have to talk. Robert wants to know if I still consider the season to be a bizarro season, or was that just a few weeks? It was definitely heavily in the mix in the first few weeks. They've started to stabilize, but the road record is still weird. We don't know if the home record will improve. Hopefully it will. And there was some conversation about that. And Ken Holland kind of paid lip service to something that's kind of obvious, which is as the team gets better, the record will get better. They've only been playing on the road for the last 6 games. So the fact that they've been playing better means their road record has improved. Okay, yes, that's sort of a no duh statement. The question then is, are they improving or are they improving on the road? And we won't know until they play home games. Additionally, in the bizarro category is the deserve to win meter, which is, I get it, made up fake. At some point, I'll stop saying it. But their record against the deserve to win meter is still out of whack. The last game against, was it Ottawa? No, Washington. Washington is a game they deserve to win and they lost, and Ottawa's a game that they deserve to lose and won. End result is they go 1-1 in games that you'd project them to go 1-1, but it's still just opposite. So that to me is sort of bizarre. Robert says, still bizarre that Corey Perry's the king and that the Ducks are in first place. Yeah, it's a weird season. And I've talked to other people about this from different markets. It's not just a weird season for the Kings, it's a weird season across the league. There are a ton of things that are happening. And there was just a lot of time spent today talking about how close the league is and how tight the league is. And I just personally find that to be this interesting conversation. Yes, the league is close. The standings are sort of designed to make the league close. It's early. It's still 20 games in. I know it's not early, but it's early enough that, yeah, there's not a lot of separation between the teams. And honestly, there's never a ton of separation between the teams. You get a couple teams out way ahead in the front. You get a couple teams way out behind that aren't really competing. You sort of call it a year or something. But yeah, the rest of the league is kind of bundled up. That's what the salary cap exists to do. That's what parity exists to do. That's the reason the contracts are formatted the way they are. The trades are like every year they make rule changes to make sure that the teams stay bundled up together. So it's not a particularly interesting conversation to me. Other things that were discussed. Uh, Ken Holland was asked how he feels about Dumoulin and Cece. His answer was 2 words. He said, "I'm happy." I think he said. I think that's what he said. It was very short, whatever it was. There was no more conversation about that. I asked Ken Holland. Um, this was after the Kuzmenko topic had been introduced in the conversation. I asked Ken Holland, does he have conversations with the coaching staff about decisions like that, taking Corey Perry out of the line? Or not Corey Perry, excuse me, Andre Kuzmenko. And Ken Holland said, yes, he does have conversations with the coaching staff about that. He then clarified the coach is hired to coach. That is ultimately the coach's decision. But he also threw in a wrinkle that sometimes he will overrule the coaching staff. Now, he didn't specifically say Jim Hiller's coaching staff. He just said the coaching. He's been a general manager in multiple places, so I don't know if he was speaking hypothetically or if there have been times in Detroit or Edmonton where he overruled a coach's wishes. Uh, but it's an interesting, I'm glad I asked and I'm glad we got that answer because, like I said, now it's introduced into the conversation. Now we can revisit it at a later date. And part of the reason I asked is that Andrei Kuzmenko is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. So benching him, one of the things you have to take into account from a management standpoint is the long-term impact of those moves on the relationship with the player. I'm not suggesting that it negatively affected it. I have no idea. I haven't spoken to Andrei Kuzmenko about it, but whether it's Adrian Kempe or Andrei Kuzmenko or Corey Perry or Brant Clark or whoever, ice time impacts production. Production impacts contract negotiations and contract negotiations impact stability of your team. So if you're the general manager and your coach is doing things with players that you don't want them to do or that you don't approve of or that you disagree with, it's making your life harder as a general manager. So that's why I asked that question. We got the answer that I sort of expected, which is coach is coach. But then we got the wrinkle. Sometimes I will overrule the coach. That's an that's a very to me a very interesting side note. And I was prepared to follow up on that question, but I didn't because Ken Holland answered and provided that nugget unprovoked. So there was uh, a lot of wasted breath today, which is to be expected. A lot of these things are difficult because there are, and I've said this time and time again, there are multiple people seeking multiple goals in these scrum settings. It's not one person with one agenda having a one-on-one conversation. It's a room full of 20 people talking to one person for 20 to 25 minutes. You're taking turns, right? You can't all just gang up on the guy and start shouting questions at the same time. So if, the reporter from KTLA wants to ask a question about, how important is it to have Adrian Kempe under contract so that KTLA can have a 30-second soundbite to play during a game 2 months from now to fill a 30-second, you know, airtime clip before they go to commercial, he gets that time. Likewise, if Zach Dewey's writing a piece for LA Kings Insider, he wants his quotes in there. Jim Fox, Daryl Evans, John Kelly, they're in there. They want to ask their questions so that they can have background info for their jobs. I'm there, Hogan's there, Bernstein's there. There's everybody's seeking their own pursuits. Andrew Noel, Eric Stevens, everybody's writing their own articles. Everybody's there looking to have their own questions answered. And so you're getting, you know, whatever Ken Holland thinks is the quickest, easiest, most efficient way to answer that question to get to the next one. So you're not getting in depth, which is why, like I said, sometimes you have to lay the groundwork on some of these questions. You have to ask a question today, knowing that the answer might not be that productive, but now we have an answer on record. And now 20 games from now, 40 games from now, 60 games from now, after the playoffs, whatever happens, we can go back to it and say, okay, in November you said XYZ and the other thing that hasn't matched reality, or that has matched reality, or you said you were happy with this, are you still happy with that? So it's an interesting experience, an interesting game. Again, if you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you have any questions about what happened today at practice, you can put them in the comments. Just a recap for anybody joining who wasn't here earlier, Kuzmenko will be back into the lineup. Also, it sounds like Phoenix Copley will be activated for one game. He will travel with the team to San Jose, and it sounds like Darcy Kemper will stay behind and will play against Boston. If I have that right, I may have misunderstood, but that sounds like the situation. The forward lines will be, from what it sounds like, Fiala, Byfield, and Kempe. Yes, Kemper just getting some rest. Rather than traveling up to San Jose, they'll leave him behind and he'll get ready for Boston on Friday. The lines are Fiala, Byfield, and Kempe. Moore, Kuzmenko, and Kopitar, Deneau, Fogel, Laferriere, and I'm assuming Turcotte, Perry, and Armia. It sounds like those will be the line. Sorry, there's a player in a red jersey on the ice right now. Looks like an Ontario Reign player, but I can't tell because he's not wearing a stick and he's got his back to me. Yes, it's an Ontario Reign taking a skate in a red jersey right now. And Dumoulin will play with Mikey Anderson, it sounds like. with Edmondson and Clark, and presumably move Rory in the season. Whether or not Brent Clark would move to the penalty kill with Drew Doughty out of the lineup, there was a lot of talk about that. Didn't sound encouraging to me, but we'll see. I suppose anything's possible. So that's, I think, pretty much everything that was discussed. It's a lot, I know. Um, it's hard for me to keep it all straight in my head as I was sitting there. It started at 11:15. It's 12:45 right now, so a lot of things being discussed. I hope that answers anybody's questions. If you have any other questions, again, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you can get them in now before I wrap this up because there was a lot to cover. Again, Ken Holland did speak to the media for about 20, 25 minutes, give or take. Then Jim Hiller spoke to the media for 10 or 15. Then we got in and got a chance to talk to Kempe some more and to Clark. Um, Actually, I'll throw one thing out there. I did ask Kempe uh, about the contract. And, I said, listen, the money doesn't really benefit player or club. It's just meaning like it's a fair deal. It's 10.625. It's not like a totally cheap out deal, but it also isn't breaking the bank. So my question was there something else that was holding up negotiations? Was it no trade protection? Was it bonus structure? Was it, what were the details that were being held up on if the final number is 85 million over 8 years? And predictably, he said he didn't want to get into it. There were just, details to iron out, but that it was always his priority to stick around. He wanted to be here. He wanted to win a Stanley Cup here. He likes being in LA. He likes being with the Kings. So that was nice. I also asked Ken Holland if there was an internal cap structure, and I he asked me to clarify, and what I was getting at, but I didn't say explicitly, was Adrian Kempe will be the highest paid forward next year, but not the highest paid player next year. 10.625. He's making $85 million over the next 8 years, but next year, Drew Doughty will still make more money than him in that season. Drew Doughty will make $11 million. And my curiosity was, is there an internal salary cap where you wanted to not potentially alienate Drew Doughty by paying Adrian Kempe more money, even though obviously Adrian Kempe's contract, total length and value of the contract will likely be worth more than anybody else on the team. And the answer was, not only did he not necessarily understand what I was getting at the first time I asked it, part of that was on me for asking it in a nebulous way. But the fact that he didn't immediately clock onto what I was implying suggests to me that the answer is no. I was barking up the wrong tree. There doesn't seem to be any kind of concern about that internally. Otherwise, I think he would have understood what I was implying and then taken a beat to answer it. But he at first he didn't understand, and then once I explained it slightly better, he just said no. So that's probably on me to manufacture something that's not real. Bell wants to know, did they say if it's just personnel that is changing on the power play? The strategy is changing too. Nobody brought up strategy, Bell. I appreciate the question. It sounds like for now, at least, it's just personnel. Um, and it was unfortunate because we spoke to Ken Holland while practice was going on. And in the few minutes that I was at the rink watching the practice before the Ken Holland availability started, I could see on the far end of the ice that it looked like they were working on the power play. And I was trying to squint to see who was out there and what they were working on, but I couldn't see. I just saw two right-handed shots on the power play, and in retrospect, it seems pretty clear that it was Corey Perry and Andrei Kuzmenko. But I couldn't really tell what was being worked on. So, so unfortunately, we weren't watching practice, so we weren't able to ask, educated questions about what was happening in the practice right off of the hop. The very first question asked to Jim Hiller was that Ken Holland had already tipped the hand that Andre Kuzmenko would be back in the lineup. So we spoke to Jim Hiller immediately following the Ken Holland availability following practice, which none of us had watched. But the first question was, hey, Ken Holland said Andre Kuzmenko is going back in the lineup. Is that true? And Jim Hiller said yes. He was out there on the running the power play with Kopitar and Moore. And to which I said, wait a second, did you just say Trevor Moore on the power play? Like, was that a slip up? And he said, no, Kopitar, Kuzmenko, and Moore will be a forward line. It sounds like Moore will get power play 2 time, but I think the top unit All right, I'm gonna have to count and make sure. So I think the first unit will be Kopitar, Perry, Kuzmenko, Fiala, and Byfield. I'm getting old. Um, but then I thought I heard somebody say Byfield was not. You know what? Oh, I was going to ask Eric Stevens because he's sitting with my right, but he's got headphones on. I don't want to bother him. So at the very least, the personnel in the power play will change because Andre Kuzmenko is going in. Who the top five forwards will actually be remains to be seen tomorrow. I don't think the strategy will change, and that was a question that I would have loved to ask Miller, but we got limited amount of time with him, and then there was all the Ken Holland stuff, so we sort of blew past it. Nick Hayes says, I feel like they need to pass and shoot more on the power play. Listen, Dennis Bernstein asked Jim Hiller about decision making on odd man rushes. You know, sometimes the team passes when they should shoot, sometimes they shoot when they should pass, sometimes nothing happens, and it looks like, you know, paralysis by analysis, right? It looks like they just haven't been able to pull the trigger on making a decision, and before you know it, the moment is gone. And Jim Hiller did talk about that. Again, we didn't get to see the practice today. And before all of this happened this morning, it did occur to me, waiting for the Ken Holland availability to start this morning, it did occur to me that they might be intending to work on something on the power play and didn't want anybody to see it. And so scheduling the Ken Holland media availability would have been a really convenient way to just take any eyeballs off of the power play practice that would otherwise be paying attention to it. But I doubt that's what it was because they told us everything that happened and all the changes that were being made. So not likely that that's what it was, but it did occur to me. It's a little conspiracy part of my brain to think of that. Anyway, I think that's going to wrap this up. Um, again, now's your chance before I wrap it up. Any questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter? I appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope these were at least enjoyable and somewhat informative. Again, Ken Holland speaking to the media this morning. Oh, here, one more question. I was sharing also that they should call some player up from Ontario. I can Nick, I don't think you're likely to be called up from Ontario. This morning, there were only six defensemen on the ice for practice. During what I could see was only a few minutes before the Ken Holland practice started at 11. Ken Holland started at 11:15, and you know we obviously went into the room before 11:15, so was able to watch like 2 or 3 minutes of practice. From what I could see, there were six defensemen on the ice. I checked the AHL transaction log earlier today. I haven't checked it recently. There was no call up from Ontario. I'm going to check it right now while we're doing this. There was no call up from Ontario as of this morning, as of like 10:45 ish. So my hunch is, at least for now, they'll just roll with the six defensemen they have. Drew Doughty's still listed as week to week. Yeah, still no call ups made from Ontario. The reason that the Darcy Kemper Phoenix Copley situation was introduced in the conversation was that they said they would put Drew Doughty on IR. Sounds like Phoenix Copley will be brought up to replace Drew Doughty as far as having a 23-man roster. Phoenix Copley will then travel with the team to San Jose to be the backup. Darcy Kemper will stay behind to prepare for Boston. So that was sort of two birds with one stone. We find out that Drew Doughty will be placed on injured reserve, and the corresponding move to fill the roster spot. Although, come to think of it, um, no, I'm looking at the roster. No, they don't have enough space. So that is what would have to happen. But it doesn't look like they will be recalling a defenseman today. Maybe once they come back from San Jose and after the Boston game, perhaps then they'll make a corresponding move to bring up a defenseman. Would Doughty be back for when the Kings play the Mammoth in Utah? Well, let me look at the calendar real quick. I don't know off the top of my head when that game is. December 8th. I doubt it if it's week to week, but it's entirely possible. Sorry, that question comes from Nick Hayes. Um, but when they come back from San Jose, presumably Phoenix Copley will be reassigned to Ontario at that point. Ontario has two games this weekend, one Friday against Bakersfield and Saturday in Bakersfield. So if they take Phoenix Copley to play as the backup against San Jose on Thursday tomorrow, then once they return from San Jose, presumably that night, because they have a game on Friday against Boston, then Copley goes back to Ontario, is available for both rain games, and then the Rain have two games on Friday, Saturday, then don't play again until the next Friday, the 28th. The Rain are home until the 12th of December. So if the Kings want to recall a defenseman from Ontario, they have a tremendous amount of time to make those decisions. And the Kings are playing at home for a while as well. They have one game in San Jose tomorrow, then Austin, Ottawa, Anaheim in Anaheim, but it's Anaheim, who cares? Vancouver, Washington, Chicago at home. The Kings aren't on the road till December 8th in Utah, and then the Reign aren't on the road until the 12th in Colorado. So there's plenty of time for the Kings to make those decisions and make those corresponding moves. We found out today what the short-term answer will be, um, but that's my hunch as far as how that would all go. We'll have to wait and find out. Obviously, I've been wrong before. So one more time, give you another chance to get any questions in Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter if you're watching this about the availability with Ken Holland or Jim Hiller or Brant Clark or Adrian Kempe or Trevor Moore. Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap it here. Appreciate everybody watching, and you'll be able to hear quotes and see everybody else's thoughts on what happened this morning. Pretty well attended event. Again, Eric Stevens, Andrew Dennis Bernstein, John Hoven, all the Kings people. Sporting News had somebody here today. I apologize if I don't know the young man's name. KTLA was here. ABC was here. It was a 20-game check-in with Ken Holland. Presumably, they'll be doing this regularly. I will say this for Ken Holland. He's a lot more media friendly than Rob Blake. I keep seeing him pop up on other platforms, other channels. There's NHL Network, radio shows in Canada. Not shy to talk to in the media for a very long time today, so for a long time today, excuse me. So I appreciate that. Anyway, appreciate everybody checking in, and we'll do one tomorrow, probably after the morning skate, and definitely a post game show after the Sharks game. And keep your eyes and ears peeled, Kings fans. Thanks for joining me.